So the talk I'm going to give here tonight is basically staging for operation on the Trenton and Western, which is my railroad. I know there's been a lot of discussion about staging here over the past couple months, and so I wanted to make sure I could find a way that would be unique and different enough to kind of make it worth your while. So I hope I achieve that. My name is Rich Trowbridge. I've been a model railroader for about 25 years. I used to be a part of a group called the Independent High Railers Midwest Division for about 15 years. We used to have a very large 90 by 70 foot L-shaped layout at Train Fest in Milwaukee every year. I know Neil Thomas has seen that layout when it was in its glory, so Neil can verify that that was quite an experience. Recently director at large for Michiana Division MRA. Like I said, the name of the talk is Staging for Operation, but really what I guess I'm going to talk about tonight is how the process of designing staging for my layout helped me rethink and the purpose of my railroad and expand my scope of operations. I had not always been what I would call a model railroader. I've been somebody who enjoyed trains. When I went to build my first layout, the Trenton and Western, which is a proto-freelance Grand Trunk Western layout set in the early 1990s. The name comes from my location here in Bristol, Indiana. It's 24 foot by 30 foot around the wall style layout, which seems big, but when you think about it from an HO perspective, that's what, 15 by 12 foot? So that's not a big layout when you think about operationally. It's kind of just like a little switching layout, just blown up real big. And we're going to talk more about that here in the discussion. It is 148 O scale, but it's a 3-rail layout. If at the end of the presentation about staging, anybody wants me to explain what that is so that you understand it, I got some slides on it. It's not Lionel trains are on the Christmas tree, though, I can guarantee you that. So this is my Trenton and Western layout design as I'm building it right now. Like I said, I understood a little bit about operations. I wanted to have a layout where I could route some cars and switch some industries and use car cards and waybills because I was familiar with that and enjoyed it. So that's kind of what drove the design of the layout. It's a local switching layout. I could have 5 short trains, 4 to 6 cars each, pretty much coming out of this small yard, serving 9 different industries. I'll just give you a quick tour. There's a paper mill over here. Cereal factory, about 5 cars coming out of there. Some automotive suppliers, refrigerated warehouse, bakery, team track for unloading chemicals, furniture factory, stamping plant, and a grain elevator. So my whole operating concept was really set them all out, pick them all up. Set them all out, pick them all up. That's pretty much what it was, back and forth. Didn't really understand much more about what, it didn't have any bigger vision than that. Everything's kind of in captive service. You don't really get to see anything new other than the same cars are on the layout all the time. There is a ramp, 2 ramps rather, that go down to a lower level storage track area, about 17 inches below the layout. And I hadn't really considered the trains that would be down there part of the operations because I just hadn't really thought it through more than just a place to store some of the trains that I had run with the Independent High Railers group, because I'd been with that group for 15 years. I had some nice trains that I built, and rather than have to get everything out of a box and set it up, put it on the train, I figured, well, it'd be nice to have a permanent place to store some trains. So that was kind of all I really understood about staging at the time I designed this. So let's go kind of below the tracks here to see what our staging looks like. It's about 17 inches below the top deck. And so I needed these ramp tracks to kind of get down to that level. And obviously I needed to make the grades, easy enough so I could, not have to put 6 locomotives on a little train. So that kind of limited me to the yard being the size that it is. It's a double-ended yard with 6 tracks. Those ramp tracks that go back up to the top are at 6%. It's very steep. In my world of 3-rail O scale, a lot of the locomotives have rubber traction tires on the inside trucks, and each locomotive weighs about 5 or 6 pounds. So it's got a lot of tractive effort, and those grades, as steep as they are, really weren't a problem, but they were steep. So there were 6 tracks in the yard. Each track, they could hold about 10 to 14 cars each, and about 1 or 2 locomotives per train. And it, like I said, it was mostly just a place to store the other trains that I had so that I could pull it out and run them around the layout when I wanted to. But I kind of started to have some problems with this. And the number one thing was I just wasn't happy with 10 to 14 car trains. With the independent high railers, I've been running, 20 and 30 car trains with 3 and 4 locomotives on it. And that was, kind of something I really enjoyed. And I didn't think, well, I don't have a layout that big. I can't really enjoy that kind of railroading at home, not in O scale anyway. So that is a little disappointing. So I added some extra stub-ended yards off of the yard ladder there to store some extra cars, thinking, well, maybe I could just have some of my extra freight cars here and kind of tack them on to the end of trains when I wanted to run them. And that would be a solution that might make me happy. And what I realized very quickly is it was very hard to maneuver, uncouple, and recouple with only 17 inches between those decks. To get in there and be doing that kind of fussing around just wasn't something that was going to really work. And so I kind of just didn't think about staging much after a while. I said, well, let me just build the top part and kind of figure out what I want to do underneath there. And before I'm ready to build it, I'll figure that out. And over the next couple of years, I started really studying staging. And in the process of studying that, I started to understand more about what it was within the context of operations, why I kind of wanted to, figure out how I could have a little bit longer trains and how I could add those to my operating session for the switching layout. This gave me an idea. Looking at my thing I came up with, as crazy as it looked, I saw a solution hidden in there, and this is what I'm currently building now. So this is the final design for the Trenton and Western staging. Very different. We have 2 stub-ended yards with crossovers and a switchback up there in the upper left-hand corner. We'll talk about those in a minute. I reduced the grade to 4%, which is great because 6% is a lot, 4% is less. Made those ramps a little longer. So now I've got 12 tracks that can hold 15 to 20 cars. That's getting closer to what I used to run. And I can do 2 or 3 locomotives per train. That starts to feel like a mainline train in my world. In a lot of model railroad worlds, that's pretty awesome. So I felt like, okay, that's great. I was excited about that and really looking forward to kind of building it. So this is some actual photographs of the actual yard itself. On the left, I've got that little clip from that track diagram here, and you can see the actual track work here. So we've got a ramp track, which goes up to the scenic part of the layout. Got the switchback, which is how trains back into the yards after they've done their run. Crossovers here in the middle, and the yard lead coming off that yard is there. Same point of view, but just kind of going around the corner a little bit so you can kind of see how they snake around the corner there. There's S curves kind of under one part of the benchwork, and so this is just kind of how that's coming along from 2 different angles. A little checking those cars for clearances down there, making sure everything's good. I've got some 89-foot auto parts box cars that are about 2 feet long in O scale, and I have to make sure my curves are gentle enough that they don't stick out. And so this is just some photos of how I was testing that. On the left is a photograph of the distance between the decks, the top scenic part, and then that lower level where trains are kept. It's about 17 inches from railhead to railhead. It looks much more than that there, but it's just the angle on the photo. And then there's just a photograph of some of the trains sitting there in staging. But so let me kind of explain to you how this staging yard works just functionally. A train leaves a yard through the crossover and basically swings out onto the ramp track. And the ramp track obviously takes you up to the scenic part of the layout. So the train kind of traverses that part of the layout there. And what you kind of notice is that right now that train in the example is kind of just, it's really only going through the lower right-hand corner of my layout. We'll explain more about that once we get to the operation part of things. But that train can continue to go down the ramp track. And now it enters the switchback, which is parallel to the opposite yard, and does a reverse move, slow reverse move, back through the crossover and back into the yard. So by using this sort of switchback with the crossover, that was how I was able to get these very long yard tracks to store these very long trains. And it works really well. I'm very happy with how it operates. I had one time thought about, if I didn't have the switchback and just use the ramp tracks to kind of back the train into the yard, that maybe I could have 2 more yard tracks. But what I realized real quick was I didn't want to be backing down a 4% grade into a crossover and a yard ladder. So I decided, let's make those, same level as everything else. And that's kind of what gave me the idea for the switchback. So now what? I mean, it's like, okay, I achieved the goals that I had. I kind of got what I wanted out of the deal. I have room for more trains, which, as we all know, is awesome. That's great. I had to actually buy some more trains, which is always fun. But which now I kind of had a problem, which is like, okay, I've got about 5 or 6 trains that I used to run with the High Railers group, and probably got 6 more now, so room for 6 more. So what kind of trains am I going to run? What kind of trains am I going to put together here? And the process of really thinking about that, and like I said, over time, kind of studying staging and learning more about operation, I started to figure out, okay, I've got mainline trains now. How can I realistically incorporate these mainline trains into my switching layout and the operation scheme that I'm putting together? So that's kind of what led me to decide to model actual 1990s era Grand Trunk Western trains. I was a video series by Clear Block called Into the 90s Grand Trunk Western, which is kind of what really solidified my choice to model Grand Trunk Western. I live in Elkhart, Indiana, which, as you probably know, was a big New York Central town, and then Conrail. Growing up, I saw a lot of Conrail. So thought about doing that, but one day I was over in South Bend and saw the Grand Trunk Western, and just, it was different. And so it was kind of a mystery sort of thing, and I started looking into it, learning about it, and that's kind of what drove me in that direction. So I kind of knew about the railroad. I'd watched these videos a lot, so I kind of knew what Grand Trunk trains looked like as far as, what they consisted of. So I wanted to model a variety of different kinds of trains, like trailers on flat car, manifest freights, unit coals, double stack trains. So I researched these trains from the 1990s era, which is the era that I wanted to model. And I learned what kind of commodities were in those specific trains and how some of those commodities might end up to industries on my layout. And I paid attention to what specific motive power and freight cars were often used on specific trains, commonly used. And I also joined the Grand Trunk Western Historical Society. So in the process of doing all this, I actually, through the Historical Society, found a teletype train schedule from April of 1995 that showed every Grand Trunk Western and Canadian National train that came across the South Bend subdivision, which is the actual area that I'm interested in modeling. And so for the first time, I had like a train number reference, the train type, and everything from the actual locomotive power that was used on those trains, and their arrival and departure termination. So I had everything I really needed just on this one sheet. It's kind of long, but I have it all there. So for example, I had in the High Railers, I used to run a double stack train because I thought I always enjoyed those. So I looked through the teletype list and found that the Grand Trunk did not have very many double stack trains in the 1990s. In fact, in the early 90s anyway. They had a lot of trailer on flat car traffic, Canadian National laser container trains, but not double stacks. So there's only 2 that I found within the time period I want to look at here, and those were APL double stack trains out of Chicago. Train number 171 had Grand Trunk Western power. It ran 3 days a week, went from Flat Rock, Michigan to the Union Pacific Yard Center in Chicago. So like I said, all of the trains that I was interested in modeling after I kind of looked at them were all on this sheet. And so I basically went through and found the ones I wanted that matched the type of trains that I either had, coal trains, intermodal trains, manifest, and put basically together an actual list of trains to have in a session, including local trains and transfer runs and that kind of thing. So that was really the next thing that kind of really started twisting my brain a bit was, how do I connect my railroad, my fictional railroad, to the real Grand Trunk Western so that these new trains I've researched make sense? Because that's, to me, that's part of the fun, is trying to fit this into the real world as much as I can. And operationally, it kind of feels a little more natural if you know that this direction is west, that direction is east. This train is going to come from that direction. Car routing that I'm doing in operations, certain cars are going to get routed one direction as opposed to the other. So that's kind of what this exercise is about. Some of you I talked about this in my previous presentation, but this is a map of 3 different lines. The Grand Trunk Western here is in red, coming down from Battle Creek through Schoolcraft, Michigan, goes down into South Bend, Indiana, where it shares trackage with Conrail for about 2 miles and then departs south. Conrail, this is the Chicago line. Conrail that runs through Elkhart and South Bend goes on to Chicago. You see it there in blue. The Conrail also had a Elkhart to Grand Rapids line that ran east out of Elkhart through Bristol, up and crossed the Grand Trunk Western at grade in Schoolcraft and continued on to Grand Rapids. So in trying to figure out how I wanted to plug my layout that's kind of fictionally located in Bristol, Indiana, and find a way that Grand Trunk Western trains would actually be a part of that. So this is how the world looks in my world. In my world, the Grand Trunk Western doesn't cross in Schoolcraft. It actually merges and shares trackage from Schoolcraft, Michigan, down through Bristol, through Elkhart, through South Bend, and then departs again. This could be double track. A lot of the lineup along US 131 is double track. And although a railroad might have a little bit of a scheduling and dispatching kind of nightmare trying to run all those trains through there, I don't care because it's not real. But it allowed me to put a Grand Trunk Western main line through Bristol, Indiana, and that was my real goal. And so, I was really all proud of myself that I figured that out. And I was talking with some guys in the Historical Society, and someone there said, well, that actually happened once. And I said, okay, explain that. Apparently in 1986, there was a washout, a flood, and a derailment over near Cassopolis, Michigan, that caused the Grand Trunk to have to reroute its trains down this very route for about a month. So here I have actual photographs of the Elkhart to Grand Rapids Conrail line with 2 Grand Trunk Western trains heading north and south on the exact route that I kind of dreamed up in my head about how my railroad could operate. So I was very excited to figure out that was not only plausible, it actually happened for about a month. This is the Grand Trunk Western main line looking east, double track line, and the end of a Grand Trunk Western train crossing north-south on that Elkhart Grand Rapids line. So I was excited about that. So anyways, so here's the map again. Bristol is where the layout technically is. I guess it would be in that little purple box area. If you zoom in, we see this joint Conrail Grand Trunk trackage that runs through Bristol. And I kind of looked for a way to make my Trenton and Western main line fit within that world to some cities that had some places that could service some industries there. So that's kind of where the Trenton and Western lays in to that Grand Trunk Western main line. So my layout technically kind of fits in that world like this, kind of fit together. Now, what you'll notice, we talked about this earlier, is that the main line part of my layout then really only covers that much of the track plan and so those 2 areas are basically representing one another. So mainline trains really wouldn't go around my layout. I know, in a more optimum design would have been a point-to-point situation, but it was hard to do that in the space that I wanted. So I'm like, okay, I guess the mainline trains really only run through part of my layout. But we'll talk about what I decided to do about that. So now that I actually had real trains and real destinations, and I kind of had to take a look at what these yards really were. So now this is East Yard. Locations represented Battle Creek, Flat Rock, Port Huron, Sarnia, Ontario, and everything east. Running out of there, I've got a 171, which is an APL double stack train. 270, which is auto racks out of Battle Creek. 509 is a Trenton Turn, which is a local train that services my layout. 370 is a Grand Trunk Manifest train, and a CN unit grain train, all depart and return to that yard. West Yard basically is Elkhart's Conrail Yard, the Indiana Harbor Belt Blue Island Yard, Belt Railway Chicago Clearing Yard, UP Yard Center, Chicago Northwestern Proviso Yard, and all points west, with some unit coal trains, auto parts trains, CN laser service, some transfer runs, and some other locals, including a Conrail Elkhart to Grand Rapids train that would have taken that route. And so all of that journey on how to put mainline trains and get them to work on my layout. So I had a way to stage them. So now I kind of had to figure out how would they operate within, my operating session. So let's take a look at that. We're gonna talk about two trains that are staged down here. One is 171, which is that APL double stack train. The other one is EM1, which is a Burlington Northern unit coal train for Detroit Edison. And we're going to see how they interact with things on the layout now. So we're here on the scenic part of the layout. We have Trenton Yard, which now has inbound trains 506 and 509 that it breaks down and builds these local trains, L10 and L14. So my local traffic is not captured traffic anymore. It comes and goes, it leaves the layout, doesn't come back in the next session. I can put all new, whole new train together for 506 and 509. But it builds those local trains, which go to the different industries around the layout and work the different individual industries. And this is all originally we were going to have. But now we've got some mainline trains. Now, to remind you where that is, here's that GTW Conrail mainline. It's right here. It's not really much of the layout. And, the train's long enough, you don't see the beginning of it and the end of it at the same time. So that gives the feeling that it's even longer than it might otherwise be. So that's kind of cool. Needless to say, that local train might have to stop or work around or wait for that train, which adds another little bit of operational interest. But what I started to kind of think about was how could I, what other purpose could I have the Trenton and Western be for the Grand Trunk in this particular world that I've built? What I realized is that I could use the Trenton and Western as a siding for meets, that lower priority trains could come in the layout, like this one here. This is Burlington Northern train EM10 Detroit Edison coal from Edison Terminal in Wyoming to Monroe, Michigan. Now, a big loaded coal train like that's a low priority train, and they could, that joint trackage all the way from Schoolcraft to South Bend, some of it's double tracked, some of it isn't. So there's got to be places where we can have meets. So in my operational scheme now, I have several of those trains as low priority trains that when they come up from staging, they actually cross over at the junction, which you'll see there on the right. You'll see the crossover tracks, that X, which is Indiana Junction. And those trains will actually take siding on the Trenton and Western. So now we have quite a big obstacle for local trains to have to work around. They can't just be anywhere. We actually can control through signaling and some other stuff where they need to wait at certain times, and dispatcher can kind of have a little more activity going on rather than just doing the local stuff. So here comes that 171 train. As you can see, now we actually have a lot of operation going on at the same time on a relatively small layout. We've got trains that are waiting for other trains. We've got trains that are still working, some small industries that really aren't in the way of those the siding trains or those mainline trains. So the journey that I took from becoming just a model railroad person who enjoyed building and watching trains to learning about operation and understanding how all that works, staging is really what kind of brought me to where I am, because it kind of made me start to think more about these other trains and how they work. So as you can see, we went from where we were to where we are, and staging really helped me get there. Check the time here. Yeah, I figured the talking part might be about 30 minutes. I've got two 3-minute videos to kind of show you these mainline trains in action on the Trenton and Western. And you'll see in the video, it'll show you exactly where they're, what part of the layout they're traveling over. You might also look in some of the train footage. You'll see like the lower level staging yard underneath some things. You'll see some of the ramp tracks in the background if you're paying attention. So we can watch those now. There's some music in these. I hope it's not too loud. I don't think it is, but let's just take a look.
Videos, but this will be the second one in a row. I like videos.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing what you can do with his graphics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the video is jerky and stuff.
Still not.
Mm-hmm.
Dark racetrack, it looks like.
I think it's an Atlas track, to tell you the
Atlas.
truth.
Okay.
It
You can
may
see the
be-
lower level staging yard there on the bottom.
East of El Grande.
Yeah, but how the hell do you get to it when you finish it? The answer is you don't.
That train's not moving very fast. It's 20 cars. Has a little wait time. If you're doing other things around the layout, you've actually got to clear for that. And it kind of feels like it's longer to me when we run them, maybe not quite so fast. And that was kind of the idea, the intent. You can also see the ramp track there in the background if you look. The ramp track on the one side of the layout actually goes into my workshop and furnace room. Because the only way I could kind of get the grade to work was to give it a little extra length. And so it goes under that underpass and goes into my furnace room and pops back out down underneath the layout. This is a 14 car auto rack train. These are about 2 feet long each. So you can see that crossover junction where trains cross over from the main to the Trenton and Western line, and also how the main diverges and departs back down to staging. So that's just a little look at some of those trains. I've got one more. If the video is working and people can see it, and you want to see another one, we can do that. Otherwise, we can end it and just start with questions if anybody's got wants to do that.
Go ahead, Rich. I think it's working.
Okay. You'll notice that these videos were recorded the week the pandemic started. We're all locked up in our house. I didn't have anything better to do, so I made these videos. So this is an auto parts train that comes out of the Belt Railway Chicago clearing yard that actually has work to do in Bristol at the stamping plant. So some of these cars on this train actually get cut off and swapped out for cars at Indiana Stamping. This train doesn't just run through, it actually takes siding, breaks off the train, does its work, links back up, and then goes back down the route you're seeing it go here. There's that ramp track again in the background if you see it. I think there's one more. So that's really all I have. Obviously, I went over a lot of stuff kind of fast, but if anybody has any questions or things they want to see again or whatever, just let me know.
Yeah, Rich, that was cool.
Thanks.
I saw there's one turnout that looks like it's leading to nowhere in that one spot as you go
Yeah,
towards.
well, there's definitely some railroad left to build, so
Okay, yeah, that's
it's probably a siding. It's probably a siding to one of the industries I don't have in yet.
nice.
Clever
Hey,
stage.
Thank you.
Rich, I've got a question.
Sure.
Have you ever had both trains 171 and EM, I think it was 01 or 10,
Yeah. EM10.
both of them coming onto the local part of the layout at one time and then have a third train go by?
Well, I haven't. I mean, I've thought about a lot of things. That's that's certainly something you could do. That would definitely gum up the works real well. But there's room for that. In fact, you could probably put both trains in siding over near Trenton Yard. And here, let me just jump out of here real quick, and you could probably do that. Just get to the layout here real quick.
Well, I'm a big gummer upper of the works. I like that. That
Like,
right crossover there, or that crossover on the right side, I think you call that Indiana Junction. I'm not sure.
Yeah, right there. Mhm.
As I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, well, he's got some beautiful models. It's a shame you only see them for, a few seconds.
I thought about the same thing.
What could happen if all the mainline trains, you treated Indiana Junction as Indiana Junction in one spot and you treated it as Michigan Junction in another spot, and all the trains come up and go through that local area. They cross over, go around, and then cross over again and go back to their yard.
So talk about like when you're running through one direction, it's Indiana Junction. You run through the other direction, it would be like a different place.
Well,
Sort of
it's
geographically.
kind of in the directions, but it would be two places at one time where that
Oh, okay.
all the trains, instead of that running on that 16-foot or 12-foot, how long did you say that was, that the trains are exposed?
Oh, it's probably 20 feet.
Okay, I was just thinking instead of just doing that, you take all of them and go around. And then your locals would really have a time to try
They
to get their
would.
stuff done.
And within the, I've got like all the way on the left here, there's a branch line that leaves goes out to the paper mill, and the paper mill has its own couple trains that, and then there's a couple other industries along that little branch. Here in there's a
Yeah.
so you could have two different trains working, that, or one train working that area, and another local have to use that to get out of the way. So, and there's another longer siding off by Indiana Junction, and if that job hasn't been finished yet, there's room for locals to get out of the way, I think, too, around the course of that would work. There's an arrival departure track around the yard where if a local needed to either wait to get out, it wouldn't stop the yard crews from building the next train either. So, because the locals are only about 4 to 5 cars, 6 cars max. So there's room to do what you're talking about. It would definitely be interesting.
Well,
Honestly,
how do you get-
go ahead.
How do you get you mentioned a train, I think it was full of auto parts or.
Yeah, auto parts. Mhm.
How does that train drop off its cars in your yard? Or
Okay, and
towards your yard?
sure. That train comes out of, let me go down here and see if I can talk with these notes while I'm doing this here. That train originates at Belt Railway Chicago Clearing Yard, comes out of West Yard. So it's coming up the ramp track here on the lower part of the screen.
Okay,
And boy, that's a really busy one. But if you can see where the low priority train, which in this case is that Burlington Northern coal train, where it's sitting, that's where 288 parks. It parks in that exact same location, and it pulls off the front 5 cars of that train and rolls around back across the bridge there. And so Indiana Stamping is all the way over to the right in the lower right-hand corner. It's that big long siding. So that's where it does its work by Indiana Junction. And then it picks up and drops off what it needs to, continues around on track 2 around the yard, paralleling the rest of its train. And if you see back over where the power is, there's a crossover there. So it can actually cross back over to track 1 and tack on that way. Or, I mean, it could even back up if you wanted it to, but it would be a real long backup move. So I prefer to kind of keep it going forward. And yeah, so that's how and then it recouples its train and continues and leaves. So that's how it works. If that makes sense.
yeah, I just thought it would stop on that bridge down there on the lower right.
Right. Well, the actual locomotives with whatever cuts going in and out of Indiana Stamping, that's where it kind of does its work. It puts the inbounds on there, goes and gets the empties, swaps them out. That's really where the cars for that job are being exchanged.
Do you have more than 2 people operate or just you operate?
Well, it's not finished yet, so we'll have to figure that out. But honestly, the way one of the things I found out about operating is that I enjoy operating with other people. And I've been a lone wolf in this hobby long enough. And, that was honestly to try and find a way of doing this, operating this layout once it's ready. How many people could I have on a crew? Not so much how many do I need, but could I have and still have, something entertaining for people to do. So if we had, if each train, I figured I could do at least 6 people with somebody being, a dispatcher, probably me, but 6 people in the sense I have 2 people working the yard together, a conductor and a yard master, so that you'd have somebody actually running trains, somebody handling paperwork. We could do that with the yard. So there's 2 people running the yard. You could have 2 people doing the locals. You could have 2-man crews doing that if you wanted to, and switch back and forth, if people wanted to run or, sort paperwork and uncouple things. So, that's a prototypical sort of way to enjoy that with 2-man crews. You could have, while one local crew is handling a job, you could have another, their conductor could peel off and maybe do one of the other trains. The biggest thing I would want to make sure is that people always had something to do, so that, you could spend an hour and a half or 2 hours operating the layout, and that there wasn't a whole lot of standing around. But I'm thinking 6 with somebody acting as dispatcher is about right to do a session that would probably take about 2 hours from other research I've done for people with similar sized layouts in HO. That's about what I'm guessing.
Rich, what kind of track is it that you've got on lay? I think they're raw switches. I can't tell with the track though.
Right. It's Gargrave's track and raw switches. You're right with that. Atlas and MTH both make some really nice 3-row track. It's just way more expensive.
Yeah.
And the Gargrave's tracks are the ties are wood, so they weather up real nice. And I distress them a little bit and color them where I can. And they look nicer that way than the plastic ties, I think, a lot of times. But
Yeah, I agree. I've actually got the same thing. I'm curious, are you running with Legacy or DCS or both?
both.
Okay.
Some of those trains you saw were Legacy trains. Some of those are TMC or DCS trains, all at the same time.
Yeah, I've got the cord. I've got all MTH stuff or all DCS stuff. I've got the cord though. I've got to get a Legacy system and get it integrated as well.
I don't have the systems connected. Like I know you can actually, with a serial cable, connect the two different systems and run all of the trains from the MTH remote, but they're just operating sort of by them, together, but not connected. I've got enough remotes for people to use what they want to use for the Lionel trains, including, Bluetooth phones. And so it's like, I don't really need to operate the one system from the other. They're just both there and they both work. So it's just a matter of having the right.
You can you still can do it like simultaneously, right? Even though you don't have the serial cable. Yep. Okay, I figured you could. I've never, because most people I know, if they've got the setup, they've got it just running through the DCS remote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the DCS remote is nice. It has a lot of functions that the Legacy remote still doesn't have. But honestly, it's frustrating to even have to worry about two different systems. And it's like, I don't want to add any more complexity to my hookup. So it's just like, they both work. If you're running, 171, you're going to want to have a Legacy remote or a Bluetooth phone with the Lionel app on it. And if you're running, that BN Coltrane, you either want to have the DCS remote or the DCS app. So it's just a matter of whatever you want to pull up on your phone, you can run whatever train you want. So it works out well.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I think the way you reconfigured underneath the railroad is pretty neat, because you don't have to actually change the cars and stuff around. I mean, sometimes we have to literally move the car by hand from one train to another. And with that crossover down there, you don't have to do that.
Right. And that's, when I was coming up with this idea, that's the thing. The first thing I figured out was like, yeah, that's not going to work. So with and it took me a while, really just with lots of sketching. And I have a CAD program that a railroad CAD program I used to, I built like dozens and dozens of things. And eventually this is just, it just clicked. I was like, that works.
Yeah, it's neat.
Hey, Rich, are you part of the Elkhart Club?
No, I know a lot of those guys like Chuck and some of those guys, but I have so much, I only have so much time.
I'm in the same boat. I know a lot of those guys, but I'm not in the club. I was going to ask if you wanted to be on my Burlington Southern crew call. And
whereabouts are you, John?
Syracuse.
Okay.
Because I normally have like 20 to 25 people, and we run about 47 trains.
Okay.
So there's a lot of operation, and you get some more ideas there too. You said you didn't operate much.
Well, I'll send you my email address here afterwards if you like. Yeah,
okay.
Thanks. Actually, it's in Groups.io if you want to go there, if you're able to look in there. I think do we have a directory in there, Neil, in Groups.io? I don't know if you heard me.
Can't get to it. I don't believe.
Okay.
Except for the five names.
Or not any of Ron's email, you can probably find it too.
John's email is probably in the invite for this particular event. So
yeah,
right.
John Hands
here is on the list.
hotmail.com. It's not hard.
Okay. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, send that to me.
Okay.
I know we're missing Chuck tonight. Chuck's on his way to Iowa.
Oh, okay.
Did
Well,
he
Rich-
lose a bet?
Yeah, Rich, your slides are spectacular. And
Thank you.
for those that don't know it, Rich is a professional graphics designer, so that's why he can show us up so much on
I
his
got nothing else
slides.
better to do.
Who
I
drew?
was sitting here trying to pay attention to the presentation, and the whole time I'm sitting here with the technology. How does he do that? How does he do that? Then another gentleman told me on the message that you were a professional. I said, okay, that explains everything.
So did you draw the track plan out that you normally see like in model railroad and stuff?
I copied my track plan as close to the one in Model Railroader in style and function as I possibly could. Yes.
Just like it.
I just pulled up, their standard layout for the article, set the type the same way. And I sent it to Cody Grivno. Cody's been to my layout while I was building it. He was here for our NMRA
Yeah.
symposium a few years back. And he came over to see Dan McDonough's layout and walked over to see mine. And I showed him this. He got a big kick out. He laughed. He goes, "Wow!" It's like I wasn't aware you'd been published. And I said, "I haven't yet," but yeah,
Make it easy on them.
You should be making their job easy.
yeah. Well, that's what I told him. I said, "Look, I've done the hard work for you already."
Yeah, that's right.
I might have a job for you, Rich.
I do Dan's first. Dan McDonough is first in line on that. He's already if you've seen Dan's layout, you know how much track he has. So I'm gonna be busy for a while.
I think I've seen pictures of it.
It's a
I've
lot.
only got 5 levels, so
Dan has 4. Close.
Well, great job, Rich. We're looking
Thanks.
for presenters for the rest of May. So if anybody's interested or has a topic, just let me or Ron know. And appreciate everybody coming out tonight. And Rich, it's a very beautiful presentation and very interesting as well. Very clever.
Thank
how
you.
did that. So thanks for sharing. And
Thank
we'll see
you.
all you guys in a week or so.
Thanks.
nicely done,
Everybody.
Rich.
Thanks.
Very cogently presented.
Thank you.
Hopefully see everybody maybe next Thursday.
Absolutely.